This would be the other side of the garage wall in there. You see it's only 4 foot tall here, but it goes 4 foot down. So my thought was I'd start here with a partner saw and just open that up. I've got the joist across it reinforced to handle the span when the wall below it's removed. I made a point of not putting rebar into this section, and I used mortar to fill up the blocks instead of concrete like I did everywhere else. All these other walls have concrete and rebar every other hole, so this is very, very well, I'll say it's very over-engineered according to the building codes. I started over here by this column since it was closest to the doorway that I had to toss the cement. Went down 2 feet, went down another 2 feet, and then now I suddenly had my 8-foot head clearance. This floor here is even with the garage floor on the other side of the wall, so I poured a floor in there. Then I came over here and ran a beam to connect both piers together so that they wouldn't be tempted to kick out from each other. I started the 2 foot of wall right around here. I had the top dimensions 7 by 7 since it was going to get narrower as I went down. I put an awful lot of rebar in there. I also, about every 3 feet, shot 3 5-foot lengths of 3-inch PVC pipe in at a 45-degree angle until I ran into the layer of clay. Then I drove a piece of rebar about a foot past the bottom of the pipe, filled them with concrete, and then when I came back and did the final coat over the walls, I tied all those pieces of rebar into the rebar going up and down. So essentially this little bit of concrete here is probably spread out over maybe a 10 by 20 foot area with all these little fingers holding into the seam so it doesn't drop. Now the bottom here is concreted. I've got a drain line that runs the perimeter of the house, and when we get really heavy rains I get a little water in there. But I've actually made a drain at the bottom of this and temporarily put a well pump on it so that I better get a light. This goes down a ways. There's concrete poured behind all that lumber which I had for forms. I need to tie it into that section of wall there, but it is, like I said, being held up very well by 6 rods on each side embedded into the clay. The layer of sand's only about 5 foot deep. Then we have about 20 foot of clay. It's a bit marbled. You wouldn't want to dig in it. Some of it I suspect is dolomite. They like to use that for driveways because it's just a very, very soft form of limestone. It doesn't wash out like a clay or a sand would. But you wouldn't want to dig a tunnel through there and stick your head underneath a chunk that might just suddenly come loose. According to FEMA, the best and safest place for me to make a safe room would be to tunnel under here underneath the garage floor and build, say, a 8 by 12 foot room, in which case I would turn this shaft here into a stairwell and then pour a concrete lid over it. I know that the water, since I took a 10-inch piece of pipe and I shot it down with water pressure through the floor down about 15 feet, Then I dropped a 4-inch piece of pipe in there down about 30 feet. And then, just because I'm OCD and never throw things away, I happen to have 20 foot of well screen and a bunch of 2-inch pipe. So I shot that down about 60 feet. Now I hooked up a well temporarily to it and pumped about 8 gallons a minute with a half horsepower pump for 30 hours, never ran out of water. This is actually going to serve as a drain. I don't want to have a sump pump where if I break a pipe and this room floods and fills with water and doesn't get pumped out because the power is off. If I can have a drain where it just goes 5 foot down and goes straight into the ground because I pierced a layer of clay, I figure that's much more efficient. The rest of this area, there is about 1,500 square feet here, and I think you could come up with a pretty good sized area. There's a spot over there where I could have an escape tunnel, which would be just doors like they have on the side of Kansas. If I had this direction, I can go underneath my driveway and come up with an escape tunnel, and I can do the same thing in the far back of the corner, which isn't going to show up very well because it's so dark down here. Bedrooms have to have a second means of escape. Plus, in general, I would not want to sleep in something that if the house collapsed, I'd be buried and I'd have to wait for someone to find me and then someone to come along with some equipment to dig me out. FEMA says you need 6 square feet or something per person in emergency shelter. If I could turn this into 1,400 square feet, I could handle the entire neighborhood. Just a thought. When I dug about 10 yards of this sand out by hand, I shoveled it through this doorway onto a piece of plywood I nailed on the stairs, and then I used a wheelbarrow and I took it around back and used it for landscaping. But once I made it into the clay, I dug myself about a 4-foot hole, and I took my 3-inch trash pump and put the intake line into the hole, filled it up with water from my handy 1 1/4 inch water line, which is just 2 feet away from the shaft, and then I shoveled sand into it as I sucked the water out, and I can move about a yard of sand in 5 minutes, which compared to 10 yards of sand over 2 weeks. So I kind of like the idea of hydraulic mining, turning this into a slurry and just pumping it out. And I don't really want to use my electric well pump since it raised my bill about $80 that month. But I could get a second trash pump, gasoline powered, and that would provide plenty of water to go in, and I could empty it as fast as it went out. And I could probably dig this out in a fairly short time just by taking the bobcat and dumping it into the water and letting the pump suck it out, and occasionally moving the hose in the backyard and letting it naturally spread out. So there you have 7 yards of concrete, a 21-foot hole dug in a 4-foot crawl space underneath what essentially is the dining room above us. If I pour a concrete lid on here and put a door that probably would open in so that debris wouldn't be able to block it, I would have a very small but effective tornado room. I actually was kind of hoping I could get the interest of Discovery Channel and turn this into not only just building a shelter, but turning it into maybe a 1,500 square foot house that you would expect to find in any good neighborhood, not 20 feet underground.